The smoke rose black and bitter against the pale dawn sky, and Katherine Kane stood barefoot in the dirt, watching everything she had worked for turn to ash and cinder. She clutched a tin bucket she had grabbed on her way out, her nightdress torn at the hem, her dark hair wild around her soot-streaked face. The flames had woken her just in time, licking at her bedroom window with hungry orange tongues, and she had barely made it through the door before the roof collapsed inward with a terrible groan that sounded almost human. Now she stood there shaking, not from cold, but from rage and disbelief, as the homestead her father had built with his own hands 20 years ago burned to the ground. She knew who had done this. She had known it was coming, though she had hoped her refusal would be enough to make them leave her alone. James Garrett owned most of the land around Kelton, Utah, and he wanted hers too. The spring that fed her well was the cleanest water source for miles, and her 200 acres sat right in the path of the railroad expansion coming through next year. He had made her 3 offers, each one more insulting than the last, and each time she had told him no. Her father was buried on this land. Her mother had planted the cottonwood tree by the front porch before the fever took her. This was all Katherine had left of them, and she would sooner die than sell it to a man like Garrett. But now it was gone anyway, reduced to smoking timbers and memories. The sun was just starting to crest the mountains to the east when Katherine heard the sound of hoofbeats. She tensed, wondering if Garrett had sent his men back to finish the job, but the rider who appeared was alone. He sat tall in the saddle, his horse a sturdy bay gelding that looked like it could run all day without complaint. The man wore a dark hat pulled low, a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and he had the kind of face that looked carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him, all hard angles and weathered tan. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, but his eyes held the wariness of someone who had seen more than his fair share of trouble. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away and removed his hat, revealing dark hair that was slightly too long. "Miss, are you all right?" Katherine realized she must look like a wild thing, standing there in her nightdress with her face streaked black and her hands blistered from where she had tried to save what she could. She straightened her spine and met his gaze. "Do I look all right?" He had the grace to look apologetic. "No, miss, you do not. I saw the smoke from the ridge. What happened here?" "Someone decided I did not deserve to keep what was mine," Katherine said, her voice tight. "Someone who wants my land badly enough to burn me out." The man's jaw tightened and something dark flickered across his face. "James Garrett." It was not a question, but Katherine nodded anyway. "He made me an offer. I refused. This is his answer." The stranger dismounted and walked slowly toward the burning ruins, careful to keep his distance from Katherine, as though he understood she was balanced on a knife's edge between holding herself together and falling completely apart. He studied the wreckage with the practiced eye of someone who knew what to look for. "Fire started in 3 places," he said quietly. "Here, here, and here. You can see where the burn patterns are darkest. This was deliberate." "I know it was deliberate," Katherine snapped. Then she took a breath and forced herself to be calm. This man had done nothing to her except stop to help. "I am sorry. You are right, of course. I just do not know what I am supposed to do now." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were a startling shade of gray in the morning light. "You have anyone in town? Family? Friends?" Katherine shook her head. "My father died 3 years ago, my mother before that. I have been managing the homestead on my own since then. Garrett know you were alone out here?" "Everyone knows," Katherine said bitterly. "I am sure that is why he thought he could push me around. A woman alone is easy prey, is that not right?" The stranger's expression hardened. "Not to any man worth his salt." He seemed to come to some kind of decision, settling his hat back on his head. "My name is Nathan Sutton. I have a ranch about 8 miles north of here, up in the foothills. It is not much, but it is solid and it is safe. You will stay with me for now." Katherine blinked at him, startled by the abruptness of the offer. I cannot just go home with a stranger. You cannot stay here either, Nathan pointed out, gesturing at the smoldering ruins. And if Garrett is willing to burn you out, he will come back to make sure you got the message. You need somewhere safe to figure out your next move. I do not even know you. You know my name now, and you know I am not the kind of man who burns down homesteads in the night, Nathan said. His voice was calm, reasonable, but there was steel underneath it. Miss, I am not trying to scare you, but you need to think practically. You have no shelter, no food, and no protection if Garrett's men come back. I am offering you all three, with no strings attached. You can stay as long as you need, and when you are ready to figure out how to fight back, I will help you do that too. Katherine wanted to argue. She had spent 3 years proving she could take care of herself, that she did not need anyone's help or protection, but she was also not a fool. Nathan Sutton was right. She had nothing left here except ash and anger would not keep her alive if Garrett decided to do more than just burn her out. Why would you help me? She asked quietly. What do you get out of this? Nathan's expression softened slightly. I get to sleep knowing I did not leave a woman alone and defenseless when I could have helped. That is enough for me. He paused, then added, and for what it is worth, I have had my own run-ins with Garrett. He tried to buy me out last year when I first settled here. I told him no, and he made things difficult for a while. Ran off some of my stock, poisoned one of my water sources. But I am too stubborn to scare, and eventually he moved on to easier targets. I am sorry you became one of them. Katherine studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. He met her gaze without flinching, his gray eyes steady and honest. She had always prided herself on being a good judge of character, and everything about Nathan Sutton said he meant what he said. He was not offering help because he wanted something from her. He was offering because it was the right thing to do. All right, she said finally. I will come with you, but only until I can figure out how to get my land back and make Garrett pay for what he did. Something that might have been approval flickered across Nathan's face. Fair enough. He walked back to his horse and untied his bedroll from behind the saddle, shaking it out to reveal a wool blanket. Here, you cannot ride through town dressed like that. Katherine looked down at herself and felt heat flood her cheeks as she realized she was still in her nightdress, the thin cotton doing very little to preserve her modesty. She took the blanket gratefully and wrapped it around herself like a shawl. Thank you. There is a general store in Kelton that should have some ready-made dresses, Nathan said, tactfully looking away while she arranged the blanket. We will stop there on the way through and get you some proper clothes and supplies. I do not have any money, Katherine admitted, hating how the words tasted. Everything I had was in the house. I will cover it, Nathan said. You can pay me back when you get back on your feet. Pride warred with practicality in Katherine's chest, but practicality won. She needed clothes. She needed shoes. She needed 100 things she no longer had, and accepting help from Nathan Sutton did not make her weak. It made her smart. Thank you, she said again, and meant it. Nathan gave her a nod and held out his hand to help her mount. Katherine hesitated only a moment before taking it, letting him boost her up into the saddle. She had ridden since she was a child, and it felt natural to settle her weight and gather the reins. Nathan swung up behind her, careful to leave a respectful distance between them, and clicked his tongue to set the horse moving. They rode in silence for a while, leaving the smoking ruins of Katherine's homestead behind. The morning was beautiful in the way only Utah mornings could be, the sky a clear, endless blue, and the air still cool before the heat of the day set in. The sagebrush rolled away in silver-green waves, and in the distance the mountains rose up like the backbone of the world. Katherine had always loved this land, loved the harsh beauty of it, and the way it demanded strength from everyone who tried to make a life here. Her father used to say that Utah separated the wheat from the chaff, and only the strong survived. She intended to survive. Tell me about Garrett, she said as they rode. You said you had run-ins with him. What kind of man is he? Nathan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. He is the kind of man who thinks money and power mean he can do whatever he wants. He came out here from back east about 5 years ago with a fortune he inherited and bought up half the territory. He has got political connections, judges in his pocket, and a crew of men who will do whatever he tells them without asking questions. He is smart and he is ruthless, and he does not like being told no. Sounds like a real prince, Catherine said dryly. He is a snake, Nathan said flatly. And the problem with snakes is they are hard to kill. You cut off the head and the body keeps moving. So how do we stop him? We prove he burned you out, Nathan said. Get the law involved. Bring enough evidence that even his pet judges cannot ignore it. And how do we do that? I cannot prove he did it. I did not see who set the fires. But someone did, Nathan pointed out. Garrett would not dirty his own hands with something like this. He would have sent his men, and men talk, especially when they have been drinking. We find out who did it, we get them to confess, and we take that to the territorial marshal. He is honest, not one of Garrett's creatures. He will listen. Catherine felt a spark of hope kindle in her chest. It was not much, but it was more than she'd had, standing alone in front of her burning home. You really think we can do this? I think we can try, Nathan said. And I think you are the kind of woman who does not give up easy. Catherine smiled despite everything. You are right about that. They reached Kelton just after 9 in the morning, when the town was starting to wake up and go about its business. Kelton was not much to look at, just a collection of buildings clustered along a dusty main street with the railroad depot at one end and the church at the other. But it was home, or at least it had been. Now Catherine looked at it with new eyes, wondering which of her neighbors knew what Garrett had done, wondering which of them might have helped. Nathan guided his horse to a stop in front of the general store and dismounted, then helped Catherine down. The blanket had slipped a bit during the ride, and she clutched it tighter around herself as they went inside. The proprietor, a round-faced man named Mr. Henderson, looked up from behind the counter and his eyes went wide. Miss Kane? What in heaven's name happened to you? My homestead burned last night, Catherine said, keeping her voice level. I need some clothes and supplies. Mr. Henderson came around the counter, his face creased with concern. Burned? How did that happen? Someone set it, Nathan said before Catherine could answer. His voice was calm but left no room for argument. Miss Kane needs help, not questions. Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Nathan's expression made him think better of it. Of course. Let me get some things together for you, Miss Kane. We have got some ready-made dresses in the back, and I can put together a bundle of essentials. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, Catherine said. It took about half an hour to get everything sorted. Catherine picked out 2 simple cotton dresses, one dark blue and one brown, along with undergarments, stockings, and a pair of sturdy leather boots. Mr. Henderson added soap, a hairbrush, and some other necessities to the pile, along with a canvas bag to carry everything. Nathan paid for it all without comment, counting out the bills from a worn leather wallet. Catherine changed into the blue dress in the back room, grateful to be in proper clothes again. When she emerged, she found Nathan waiting by the door, his expression thoughtful. What is it? She asked. Just thinking, Nathan said. We should talk to the sheriff before we leave town. Let him know what happened. Get it on the record. Catherine's expression darkened. The sheriff is in Garrett's pocket. Everyone knows it. Maybe so, but we still report it. We do everything by the book, Catherine. That way, when we do catch whoever did this, there is no question about our intentions. It was the first time he had used her given name, and Catherine found she did not mind it. In fact, she liked the way it sounded in his low, steady voice. They found Sheriff Dawson at his office, a small building next to the town hall. He was a heavy-set man with a graying mustache and the kind of eyes that looked everywhere except at the person talking to him. Catherine disliked him on sight. Miss Kane, he said when they walked in, leaning back in his chair. Heard there was some excitement at your place last night. Someone burned my homestead to the ground, Katherine said flatly. I want it investigated. Dawson scratched his chin, still not quite meeting her eyes. Now that is a shame, but fires happen, Miss Kane. Could have been a lamp tipped over, a spark from the stove. It was arson, Nathan said, his voice hard. The fire started in 3 separate places. Someone set it deliberately. And who might you be? Dawson asked, finally looking at Nathan. Nathan Sutton. I have the ranch up in the foothills. Right. You are the one who would not sell to Mr. Garrett. Dawson's tone made it clear what he thought of that decision. Well, Mr. Sutton, unless you or Miss Kane saw who set this supposed fire, there is not much I can do. Could have been anyone. Could have been drifters passing through. Or it could have been Garrett's men, Katherine said. He has been trying to buy my land for months. I refused. And now my house is gone. That is not a coincidence. Dawson's expression hardened. That is a serious accusation, Miss Kane. You got any proof? The proof is the ashes of my home, Katherine shot back. That is not proof of anything except a fire, Dawson said. He picked up a pen and made a show of writing something in a ledger. I will make a note of it, but unless you can bring me evidence that points to a specific person, my hands are tied. Nathan leaned forward, planting his palms on the desk. You could investigate, talk to people, see who was out near the Kane homestead last night. Do your job, Sheriff. Dawson's face flushed red. I do not appreciate your tone, Sutton. And I do not appreciate a lawman who does not care about justice, Nathan replied evenly. But we have reported the crime, so you have got it on record. When we bring you the evidence, you will not be able to claim you did not know about it. He straightened up and offered Katherine his arm. Come on, we are wasting our time here. Katherine took his arm, feeling a surge of gratitude for his support, and together they walked out of the sheriff's office. Behind them, Dawson muttered something under his breath, but Katherine did not care. Nathan had been right. They had done what they needed to do, and now they could focus on finding real proof. The ride to Nathan's ranch took them north out of Kelton into the foothills where the land started to climb toward the mountains. The terrain changed gradually, the flat sagebrush giving way to juniper and pinyon pine, and Katherine could see why Nathan had chosen this spot. There was water here, thin streams running down from the high country, and the valleys were rich with grass. It was good land for cattle, isolated enough to be peaceful, but close enough to town to be practical. Nathan's ranch came into view just before noon, and Katherine felt her first real surprise of the day. It was not grand, but it was well built and clearly tended with care. The main house was a solid log structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and a few outbuildings that looked like they served as storage and workspace. Everything was neat and orderly, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and pride. You built all this yourself? Katherine asked as they rode up. Most of it, Nathan said. Had some help with the barn raising, but the rest I did on my own. Been here about 1.5 years now. It is beautiful, Katherine said honestly. Nathan looked pleased. Thank you. It is not much yet, but I have got plans to expand. Want to build up a good herd, maybe get some breeding stock from California. He dismounted and helped Katherine down, then led his horse into the barn. Katherine followed, watching as he efficiently unsaddled the bay and gave it a quick rub down before turning it into a stall with fresh water and hay. His movements were practiced and economical, the work of someone who had spent his whole life around horses. Come on, he said when he was finished. I will show you the house. The inside of Nathan's home was as neat as the outside, with simple but sturdy furniture and a cleanliness that spoke of regular attention. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and 2 smaller rooms that served as bedrooms. The walls were bare logs, chinked tight against the weather, and the floor was smooth planed wood covered here and there with woven rag rugs. You can have the back bedroom, Nathan said, pointing to one of the doors. I will take the front. There is a pump out back for water, and the privy is about 50 yards to the east. I know it is not fancy, but it is comfortable enough." "It is perfect," Katherine said, and meant it. After everything she had lost, this simple, solid house felt like a sanctuary. "Thank you, Nathan. I do not know how I can ever repay you for this." "You do not owe me anything," Nathan said. "Just promise me you will not go off and do something dangerous on your own. If we are going to take on Garrett, we do it smart and we do it together." Katherine met his eyes and saw the genuine concern there. "I promise." Over the next few days, Katherine settled into a routine at Nathan's ranch. She was not the kind of woman who could sit idle, so she made herself useful. She cooked meals, tended the vegetable garden Nathan had planted behind the house, and helped with the lighter ranch work. In return, Nathan treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect, never making her feel like a burden or an obligation. They worked together during the day and talked in the evenings, sitting on the porch as the sun went down and the first stars came out. Katherine learned that Nathan had grown up in Colorado, the youngest son of a ranching family. He had struck out on his own 2 years ago, determined to build something that was his and his alone. He was educated, having attended school back east for a few years, but he had always known he belonged in the West. He was quiet and thoughtful, but there was a core of iron in him that Katherine recognized because she had the same thing in herself. Nathan learned that Katherine's father had been a surveyor who had claimed his land in Utah when Katherine was just a baby. She had grown up in the territory, helping her parents carve a life out of the harsh landscape. Her mother had taught her to read and write, to cook and sew, while her father taught her to ride and shoot and work the land. When her mother died of fever, Katherine had been 15, and she had taken over running the household. When her father died 3 years ago, she had taken over everything else. She had managed, not just survived, but thrived, and she was not about to let James Garrett take that away from her. "You are angry," Nathan observed one evening as they sat on the porch. The sky was ablaze with color, orange and pink and deep purple, and the air smelled of sage and wood smoke. "Of course I am angry," Katherine said. "Garrett burned everything I had." "I know, but anger can be useful if you channel it right, or it can eat you up from the inside. You have got to decide which it is going to be." Katherine looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed help, and felt something shift in her chest. "How do you stay so calm about everything?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I am not calm. I just do not see the point in wasting energy on things I cannot control. I cannot change what Garrett did to you, but I can help you fight back, and I can make sure you are safe while we figure out how to do it. That is what I can control, so that is where I put my focus." "You make it sound so simple." "It is not simple at all," Nathan said with a slight smile, "but it is necessary. Otherwise, you will drive yourself crazy." Katherine found herself smiling back. "You are a wise man, Nathan Sutton." "I am a practical man," Nathan corrected. "There is a difference." That night, lying in the narrow bed in Nathan's spare room, Katherine stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. A week ago, she had been alone on her homestead, stubbornly clinging to her independence. Now she was living with a man she barely knew, dependent on his kindness and protection. It should have chafed, should have made her feel weak and helpless. Instead, she felt something else entirely. She felt safe. She felt supported. And more than that, she felt a growing connection to Nathan that went beyond simple gratitude. There was something about him that called to her. Something in the way he moved and spoke and looked at the world. He was strong without being overbearing, kind without being soft, and he treated her like an equal in a way most men never had. Katherine fell asleep with a smile on her face and dreamed of gray eyes and steady hands. The investigation into the fire began in earnest the next day. Nathan had friends in the area, other ranchers and homesteaders who were not under Garrett's thumb, and he reached out to them for information. Katherine went with him, riding double on his horse since he only had the one saddle, and together they visited half a dozen spreads over the course of 3 days. Most people had nothing useful to offer, but they were sympathetic. A few had their own stories of Garrett's heavy-handed tactics, offers that were really threats, stock that went missing, or fences that got cut. There was a pattern there, a web of intimidation that Garrett had been weaving for years, but nothing concrete they could use as evidence. Then, on the fourth day, they got a break. They were visiting a small ranch owned by a man named Tom Briggs, a weathered old-timer who had been in the territory since before Kelton even existed. Tom listened to their story with a grim expression, then nodded slowly. "I might know something," he said. "A few nights ago, I was up late with a sick calf. Heard riders go past on the road, heading toward your place, Miss Kane. 3 of them, moving fast. Thought it was strange at the time, what with the hour and all, but I did not think much of it until now." "Did you recognize any of them?" Nathan asked. Tom shook his head. "Too dark, and they were too far away. But one of them had a distinctive horse, a paint with a lot of white on the chest and legs. I remember thinking it was a fine-looking animal." Katherine and Nathan exchanged glances. It was not much, but it was something. "Anyone in town have a horse like that?" Katherine asked. "A few folks," Tom said. "But the one that comes to mind first is Carl Haynes. He works for Garrett, been riding that paint for about 6 months now. Proud of it, too. Shows it off whenever he gets the chance." "Carl Haynes," Nathan repeated, his jaw tightening. "I know him. He is one of Garrett's enforcers, does the boss's dirty work. So, if we can prove Haynes was at my homestead that night, we can tie him to the fire," Katherine said, feeling hope surge through her. "And if we can get him to admit Garrett sent him, we have everything we need." "That is a big if," Tom warned. "Haynes is not going to confess just because you ask him nicely, and Garrett protects his own." "Let us worry about that," Nathan said. "Tom, would you be willing to testify to what you saw, if it comes to that?" Tom hesitated, and Katherine could see the fear in his eyes. Going up against Garrett was dangerous, and Tom was just one old man trying to live out his days in peace. But then his expression hardened. "Yeah, I will testify. I am tired of watching Garrett stomp all over people just because he can. It is not right, and someone needs to stand up to him." "Thank you," Katherine said, reaching out to clasp his hand. "Thank you so much." Armed with this new information, Nathan and Katherine returned to the ranch to plan their next move. They needed more evidence, something that would tie Haynes directly to the fire. Nathan thought they should try to catch Haynes in town, maybe get him talking when he had been drinking. Katherine wanted to confront him directly, but Nathan talked her out of it. "He will just deny everything and run straight to Garrett," Nathan pointed out. "We need to be smart about this." They decided to watch Haynes for a few days, learn his routine, and see if they could catch him doing something incriminating. It was not a perfect plan, but it was all they had. For the next week, Nathan and Katherine took turns watching Haynes. He spent most of his time at Garrett's main ranch, a sprawling operation about 15 miles south of Kelton, but he came into town every few days to drink and gamble at the saloon. He was a big man, loud and mean-looking, with a pockmarked face and hands like hams. Katherine hated him on sight. On the 8th day of their surveillance, they finally got their opportunity. Haynes rode into town in the late afternoon and headed straight for the saloon. Nathan and Katherine followed, Katherine staying outside while Nathan went in. She waited by the window, close enough to hear but far enough not to be noticed. Inside, Nathan ordered a whiskey and stood at the bar, listening to the conversations around him. Haynes was at a corner table with 2 other men, cards spread out in front of them. They were drinking heavily, and their voices carried across the room. "Garrett sure knows how to get things done," one of the men was saying, laughing. "That Kane woman never knew what hit her." Haynes grinned, a nasty expression that made Nathan's blood boil. "It was easy. Place was dry as kindling. Went up like a torch." "You think she got the message?" "If she did not, we will deliver it again," Haynes said. "Boss wants that land, and he is going to get it, one way or another. Nathan felt a surge of anger so fierce it took everything he had to keep his expression neutral. This was it. This was the confession they needed, but he had to be smart about it. He could not just attack Haynes in the middle of the saloon, no matter how much he wanted to. Instead, he finished his drink and walked out, finding Katherine waiting anxiously by the window. He admitted it, Nathan said quietly. Bragged about burning your house, said Garrett sent him. Katherine's eyes blazed. Then we have him. We need witnesses, Nathan said. People who will testify to what they heard. And we need to get Haynes to repeat it somewhere official where the law cannot ignore it. They spent the rest of the evening putting together a plan. It was risky and it required help, but Nathan thought it could work. They would get the territorial marshal involved, bring him to Kelton with enough evidence that Sheriff Dawson could not bury it. Tom Briggs would testify about the riders he saw. Nathan would testify about what he heard in the saloon. And if they could get Haynes to confess again in front of the marshal, they would have everything they needed to take down Garrett. The next morning, Nathan rode to the territorial capital to file a formal complaint and request the marshal's involvement. He was gone for 3 days, and Katherine spent that time working the ranch and trying not to worry. She had grown used to Nathan's presence, the quiet comfort of knowing he was nearby. Without him, the ranch felt empty, and she felt exposed. When Nathan finally returned, he brought good news. The territorial marshal, a lean, hawk-faced man named Samuel Pierce, had agreed to come to Kelton and investigate. He would arrive in a week, giving them time to gather witnesses and build their case. We are really going to do this, Katherine said that night as they sat on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, so thick they looked like spilled salt. We are, Nathan confirmed. Are you scared? Terrified, Katherine admitted. But I am more angry than scared. Garrett took everything from me. I want him to pay for it. Nathan reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and rough against hers. It was the first time he had touched her beyond the practical necessities of helping her mount a horse or steadying her on uneven ground, and the contact sent a shock of awareness through Katherine. We will make sure he does, Nathan said quietly. Katherine looked at him in the starlight and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. She had been so focused on her anger and her determination to get justice that she had not let herself think about what else she was feeling. But now, with Nathan's hand in hers and his gray eyes steady on her face, she could not deny it any longer. She was falling in love with him. It should have terrified her. She had known him barely 2 weeks, and she had always believed that love was something that took time to build, like a house or a reputation. But there was no denying the warmth that spread through her whenever he smiled, the way her pulse quickened when he was near, the sense of rightness she felt when they worked together. Nathan made her feel safe and strong and understood in a way no one else ever had. And from the way he was looking at her now, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles, she thought maybe he felt the same way. Nathan, she said softly. Katherine. They sat there for a long moment, just looking at each other, and then Nathan leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, a question more than a demand, and Katherine answered by pressing closer and threading her fingers through his hair. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I have been wanting to do that for days, Nathan admitted, his voice rough. I have been wanting you to, Katherine said, and then she laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, having lost everything, in the middle of preparing to take on the most powerful man in the territory, and all she could think about was how much she wanted to kiss Nathan Sutton again. We should probably talk about this, Nathan said, though he made no move to let her go. We probably should, Katherine agreed. But can we wait until after we deal with Garrett? I do not think I can handle more than one life-changing thing at a time. Nathan smiled, and it transformed his whole face. That seems fair. They kissed again, slower this time, and Katherine let herself forget about everything else for a few precious moments. There would be time enough to figure out what this meant, where it was going. For now, it was enough to know that she was not alone, that Nathan cared for her the way she cared for him. Marshal Pierce arrived in Kelton on schedule, riding in with 2 deputies and an air of grim determination. He was a man in his early 40s, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. Nathan and Katherine met him at the hotel where he was staying and laid out their case. They had Tom Briggs's testimony about the riders. They had Nathan's testimony about what he heard in the saloon. They had the burn patterns at the homestead that proved arson. And they had a plan to get Haynes to confess again, this time on the record. Pierce listened to everything, asking sharp questions and taking notes in a small leather book. When they were finished, he sat back and studied them both. "This is serious business," he said. "If you are wrong about Garrett, or if this is some kind of personal vendetta, you will both be in a lot of trouble." "We are not wrong," Katherine said firmly. "James Garrett burned my home to force me off my land, and Carl Haynes did it on his orders. I want justice." "And you will help her get it?" Pierce asked Nathan. "I will," Nathan said without hesitation. Pierce nodded slowly. "All right then, let us go catch us an arsonist." The plan was simple. Pierce would confront Haynes publicly in the saloon where there would be plenty of witnesses. He would present the evidence they had and give Haynes a chance to deny it. If Haynes was smart, he would keep his mouth shut and demand a lawyer. But if he was arrogant, if he thought Garrett's protection made him untouchable, he might talk. And if he did, they would have him. They put the plan into motion 2 days later. Pierce walked into the saloon just after noon, when Haynes was at his usual table with a bottle and a deck of cards. Nathan and Katherine were there too, along with Tom Briggs and several other townspeople who had agreed to serve as witnesses. "Carl Haynes," Pierce said, his voice carrying across the room. "I am Marshal Samuel Pierce, and I am investigating the arson of the Kane homestead on the night of August 12th. I have evidence that places you at the scene, and I have witnesses who heard you confess to setting the fire. What do you have to say for yourself?" The saloon went dead silent. Haynes looked up from his cards, his face flushing red. "I do not know what you are talking about." "I think you do," Pierce said. He pulled out his notebook and read from it. Quote, "It was easy. Place was dry as kindling. Went up like a torch. That is what you said 3 nights ago, right here in this saloon. There were half a dozen people who heard you." Haynes's eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but everyone was watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. He was on his own, and he knew it. "So what if I said that?" Haynes blustered. "Does not prove anything. It proves you burned down Miss Kane's house," Pierce said. "That is arson, Haynes. That is a hanging offense." Fear flickered across Haynes's face, quickly replaced by anger. "I did not do nothing on my own. Garrett told me to do it. He said he wanted that land, and I was supposed to scare the woman off. I was just following orders." The words hung in the air like smoke. Katherine felt a fierce surge of triumph. He had confessed. He had implicated Garrett. They had won. Pierce signaled to his deputies, who stepped forward and pulled Haynes to his feet. "Carl Haynes, you are under arrest for arson. Anything else you want to say, you can say it in front of a judge." Haynes started to struggle, but the deputies were ready for him. They clapped irons on his wrists and hauled him toward the door. As they passed Katherine, Haynes spat at her feet. "You are making a big mistake," he snarled. "Garrett is going to bury you for this." "No," Katherine said coldly. "He is not, because he is going down right along with you." Pierce arrested James Garrett the next day at his ranch. Garrett, to his credit, did not bluster or threaten. He listened to the charges with a cold, calculating expression, then informed Pierce that he would be represented by the best lawyers in the territory and that this entire matter was a misunderstanding. But it was too late. Too many people had heard Haynes's confession, and too many witnesses were willing to testify. The case against Garrett was solid, and even his political connections could not make it disappear. The trial took place 6 weeks later in the territorial capital. Katherine and Nathan both testified, as did Tom Briggs and several others. Haynes, facing a hangman's noose, turned on his former employer and told everything. How Garrett had ordered him to burn Katherine out. How Garrett had done similar things to other people who would not sell. How the whole operation was designed to consolidate power and land in Garrett's hands. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Garrett guilty of conspiracy to commit arson and intimidation. He was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison and ordered to pay restitution to Katherine and the others he had wronged. Haynes was sentenced to 8 years for arson. When it was over, Katherine stood outside the courthouse with Nathan at her side and felt the weight of the last 2 months finally lift from her shoulders. It was done. She had her justice, and more than that, she had her life back. "What now?" Nathan asked. Katherine looked up at him. This man who had saved her when she needed it most, who had fought beside her and believed in her even when she had doubted herself. She thought about the question seriously. "What now?" "I need to rebuild my homestead," she said slowly. "The land is still mine, and I want to honor my parents' memory by making it productive again. But I do not want to do it alone anymore." Nathan's expression was carefully neutral. "What are you saying, Katherine?" She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I am saying that I love you, Nathan Sutton. I think I have loved you since the day you found me standing in the ruins of my home and offered me a place to stay. I know it is fast, and I know it is probably crazy, but I do not care. You are the best man I have ever known, and I do not want to spend another day without you." Nathan's face broke into a smile so wide and genuine it took her breath away. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there on the courthouse steps, not caring who saw them. "I love you too," he said when they came up for air. "I have been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks. I did not want to push, did not want you to think I expected anything in return for helping you. But Katherine, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I have been half in love with you since the moment I saw you standing there in your nightdress, refusing to give up." Katherine laughed, feeling tears prick her eyes. "We make quite a pair." "We do," Nathan agreed. "So what do you say? Will you marry me, Katherine Kane? Will you let me help you rebuild your homestead and make it into a home for both of us?" "Yes," Katherine said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the church in Kelton. Tom Briggs gave Katherine away, and Marshall Pierce stood as Nathan's witness. It was a simple affair, just a handful of friends and neighbors, but it was perfect. Katherine wore a new white dress that Nathan had bought her, with tiny blue flowers embroidered at the hem. Nathan wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his face cleanly shaved. When the preacher asked Nathan if he took Katherine to be his wife, Nathan answered in a clear, strong voice that left no doubt about his feelings. When Katherine said her vows, she looked into Nathan's gray eyes and saw her whole future reflected there. They spent their wedding night at Nathan's ranch, in the bed that would now be theirs together. Nathan was gentle and patient, and Katherine gave herself to him without reservation, knowing that she was safe and loved and cherished. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. The next morning, they began planning the rebuilding of Katherine's homestead. Nathan had saved a good portion of the restitution money Garrett had been ordered to pay, enough to hire help and buy materials. They would build a new house on the same spot as the old one, bigger and better. They would expand the grazing land and dig a proper irrigation system for the vegetable garden. They would make it into something worth passing down to the next generation. The work took most of the winter and into the following spring. Nathan and Katherine labored side by side, measuring and sawing and hammering. They hired a few local men to help with the heavy construction, and the house rose from the ashes of the old one like something out of a legend. It had wide windows to let in the light, a big kitchen with a modern stove, and a bedroom with space for a real bed and a cradle. The cradle was Nathan's addition. He built it himself from smooth pine, rocking it gently to make sure the balance was right. You're getting ahead of yourself, Katherine teased when she saw it. Nathan grinned. I like to plan ahead. As it turned out, his planning was prescient. By the time they moved into the new house in April of 1886, Katherine was 3 months pregnant with their first child. She told Nathan on a warm spring evening when the cottonwoods were leafing out and the air smelled of fresh grass and possibility. They were sitting on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. I have something to tell you, Katherine said, her heart pounding. Nathan looked at her, and she saw worry flash across his face. What is it? Are you all right? I am fine, Katherine assured him quickly. Better than fine, actually. Nathan, I am going to have a baby. For a moment, Nathan just stared at her. Then his face lit up with such pure joy that Katherine felt her own eyes fill with tears. A baby, he repeated like he could not quite believe it. We are going to have a baby. We are, Katherine confirmed. Nathan pulled her into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. I love you, he said fiercely. I love you so much, Katherine. I love you too, Katherine whispered. Their son was born in November, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him William after Nathan's father, and from the moment Katherine held him in her arms, she knew that her life was complete. She had her land, her home, her husband, and now her child. Everything Garrett had tried to take from her, she had gotten back 100-fold. Nathan was a devoted father, doting on William with a tenderness that made Katherine fall even more in love with him. He would sit for hours with the baby in his arms, talking to him in a low, soothing voice about the ranch and the mountains and all the things they would do together when William was older. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, their herd grew, and Katherine's homestead became a productive working farm. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Emma, born in 1888, and another son named James, born in 1890. The house was always full of noise and laughter, and Katherine often thought back to that terrible night when she had watched everything burn and wondered how she had gotten so lucky. She knew the answer, of course. She had gotten lucky the morning Nathan Sutton rode over the ridge and offered her a place to stay. Everything good in her life had flowed from that moment, from his kindness and his courage and his unwavering support. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Katherine with a gift. It was a small leather-bound book, and when she opened it, she found that he had written their story inside. Not all of it, just the beginning, the fire, their first meeting, the fight against Garrett. I wanted to make sure we never forget where we started, Nathan said, so that when we are old and our children ask how we met, we can show them this and they will know the truth, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best things. Katherine read the pages with tears streaming down her face, then looked up at her husband with all the love in her heart. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nathan Sutton. No, Nathan said, kissing her softly. We are the best thing that ever happened to each other. And as Katherine looked around at the life they had built together, the home full of love and laughter, the land they had fought for and won, she knew he was absolutely right. Years turned into decades. William grew up to be a rancher like his father, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Nathan got older. Emma became a teacher, opening a small school in Kelton, where she taught the children of the valley to read and write and think for themselves. James, the youngest, had his mother's stubborn determination and his father's steady courage. He became a lawman, following in Marshall Pierce's footsteps and dedicating himself to justice. Katherine and Nathan grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with age and hard work. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with every passing year, deepened by shared memories and the life they had built together. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the homestead to celebrate. The house was bursting at the seams with family, 3 generations of Suttons all come together to honor the couple who had started it all. Katherine, now 72, stood on the porch with Nathan's arm around her waist and looked out at the crowd of people who bore their names in their faces. She thought about that terrified young woman standing in front of a burning house, certain that her life was over. She thought about Nathan riding out of the dawn like something from a story, offering safety and hope when she had none left. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked. He was 74 now, his face weathered and lined, but his gray eyes were still sharp and clear. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Katherine said, "for everything, for you, for this family, for this life. I would not change a single moment of it." "Not even the fire?" Nathan asked gently. Katherine considered the question seriously. The fire had been terrible, the worst night of her life, but it had also been the beginning of everything good that followed. Without it, she never would have met Nathan. They never would have fallen in love, never would have built this family and this legacy. "Not even the fire," she said finally, "because it brought me to you." Nathan kissed her temple, his lips gentle against her skin. "I love you, Katherine Sutton. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for 50 more if the good Lord grants us the time." "I love you too," Katherine said, leaning into his strength, "always and forever." As the sun set over the Utah mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine and Nathan stood together, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had fought for. It had not been easy. There had been hard times and heartbreak, losses and struggles. But through it all, they had each other, and that had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything. The evening wore on, full of stories and laughter. The grandchildren ran wild in the yard, their shouts of joy echoing across the valley. Emma played piano while James sang old songs in his deep baritone voice. William and his wife served food that Katherine had helped prepare, the recipes passed down from her own mother and refined over 50 years of cooking for a growing family. As night fell and the stars came out, someone started a bonfire in the yard. The family gathered around it, the firelight dancing on their faces, and one of the grandchildren asked the question that Katherine had been waiting for. "Grandma, Grandpa, how did you two meet?" Katherine and Nathan exchanged glances, and she saw the memories reflected in his eyes, the smoke, the fear, the moment when he had offered her his hand and his home and changed everything. "It is quite a story," Nathan said, settling into his chair with Katherine on his lap, despite her protests that they were too old for such things. "It started with a fire." And as the flames crackled and the family leaned in to listen, Katherine and Nathan told their story one more time. They talked about Garrett and the fight for justice, about Marshall Pierce and Tom Briggs and all the people who had helped them along the way. They talked about falling in love and building a life together, about the struggles and the triumphs, but mostly they talked about each other, about the day they met and the moment they knew, about promises kept and vows honored, about 50 years of loving each other through everything life could throw at them. When they finished, there was not a dry eye around the fire. William stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom and Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us that real love is worth fighting for and that the best things in life are worth the wait. Happy anniversary." "Happy anniversary," the family echoed, and the words rang out into the night like a benediction. Katherine and Nathan sat together in the firelight, surrounded by the proof of their love and the legacy they would leave behind. In that moment, Katherine felt a peace so profound it took her breath away. This was what she had been meant for. Not just the land or the ranch or even the fight against Garrett. This family, this love, this life with Nathan by her side. Everything had led to this moment, and it was perfect. They stayed at the homestead for another week, surrounded by family and joy. When the last of their children and grandchildren finally left to return to their own homes, Katherine and Nathan found themselves alone in the house that had been built from ashes and determination. "It is quiet," Nathan observed, standing in the kitchen that had been so full of noise just hours before. "It is," Katherine agreed. Then she smiled and took his hand. "But I do not mind. I have you, and that is all I need." They walked out onto the porch together, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of sage and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Nathan's horses answered with soft nickers from the barn. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not ridden past that morning?" Nathan asked quietly. Katherine shook her head. "No, because I think we were meant to find each other, Nathan. Maybe not that exact morning, maybe not in that exact way, but somehow, somewhere, we would have met. Some loves are just meant to be." Nathan pulled her close, and Katherine rested her head on his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ruins. The years continued to pass, gentle and full. Katherine and Nathan grew even older, their steps slower, but their hands still clasped together. They watched their grandchildren grow and start families of their own. They saw the territory of Utah become a state in 1896, cheering with their neighbors as the news spread through Kelton. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good harvests and the births of great-grandchildren. Through it all, they loved each other with the same fierce devotion that had sparked between them on that terrible morning when Katherine's world had burned down and Nathan had offered to rebuild it with her. On a warm summer evening in 1901, when Katherine was 77 and Nathan was 79, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sunset was particularly beautiful that night, the sky ablaze with color. "It has been a good life," Nathan said softly. "The best," Katherine agreed. "No regrets?" Katherine thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the fire and the fear, about Garrett and the trial, about the hard years and the lean times. She thought about the joy of holding her children for the first time, about watching Nathan teach their sons to ride and their daughter to read. She thought about 55 years of waking up next to the man she loved, of building a life and a legacy together. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "You?" "None," Nathan said. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Except maybe that I did not kiss you sooner." Katherine laughed, the sound bright and young despite her age. "You kissed me plenty soon enough. Any sooner, and I might have thought you were taking advantage." "Never," Nathan said, mock serious. Then he smiled, that same smile that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago. "I love you, Katherine Sutton. I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you beyond the end." "I love you too," Katherine whispered, and kissed him as the sun set on another perfect day. Nathan Sutton died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, on a cold December night with snow falling softly outside. Katherine was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it for nearly 6 decades. When she realized he was gone, she did not cry. Instead, she kissed his forehead and thanked him for the life they had shared. "Wait for me," she whispered. "I will not be long." Katherine lived another 3 years, cared for by her children and surrounded by family. She spent her days telling stories about Nathan, making sure that everyone knew what kind of man he had been, kind and strong and endlessly patient. A man who had saved her when she needed it most, and then spent the rest of his life proving that he had meant every promise he had ever made. On a spring morning in 1906, Katherine Kane Sutton died in the house that she and Nathan had built together. She was 82 years old, and she passed with a smile on her face. Her last words were Nathan's name. They buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the homestead, with a simple stone that bore both their names and a single line beneath. They built a life from ashes and filled it with love. The homestead remained in the Sutton family for generations after that, passed down from William to his children and then to theirs. The story of Katherine and Nathan became family legend, told and retold until everyone knew it by heart. How a terrible fire had brought them together. How a cowboy had offered sanctuary to a woman in need. How they had fought for justice and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whistled through the eaves of the old house and the sun set behind the mountains, some swore they could still see two figures standing on the porch, a man and a woman, hand in hand, watching over the land they had loved and the family they had created, together, as they had always been, forever as they had promised. The end of their story, but also the beginning of everything that came after, a testament to the power of love and resilience, of courage in the face of injustice, of two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something that would last for all time. Katherine and Nathan's love story lived on in the hearts of everyone who heard it, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can be found, that sometimes the worst days lead to the best lives, that real love, true love, is worth fighting for with everything you have, and that sometimes all it takes is one person riding over the ridge at exactly the right moment, offering their hand and saying the words that change everything. You will stay with me for now. From that simple offer, a lifetime of love had grown. From the ashes of one homestead, a dynasty had risen. From two hearts beating separately, one enduring love story had been born. Katherine Kane, who had lost everything, found so much more than she had ever dreamed possible. Nathan Sutton, who had been searching for purpose, found it in the fierce young woman who refused to give up. Together, they had proven that love can bloom even in the harshest soil, that families can be forged in fire, and that the best stories are the ones that start with impossible odds and end with impossible joy. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry their names and their legacy forward into the future. The land they had fought for would remain in Sutton hands, productive and prosperous. The house they had built together would stand for another 100 years, sheltering new generations of the family they had created. And somewhere beyond the veil, Katherine and Nathan walked together through fields of gold, their hands clasped and their hearts full, knowing that what they had built would endure. Forever and always, just as they had promised, just as it was always meant to be.